Joe Biden is losing this election right now. If you look at his poll numbers, they just stink. He's running about even with Donald Trump in most of the national polling, but he's running slightly behind him in virtually all of the swing states, which is why, presumably, Nate Silver, who is sort of the pollster and poll analyst par excellence, he has now come out and suggested that maybe Joe Biden ought to drop out of the race entirely. He put out an entire thread yesterday and a Substack post talking about how Joe Biden is in serious trouble. He said, quote, "Personally, I crossed the Rubicon in November, concluding that Biden should stand down if he wasn't going to be able to run a normal re-election campaign," meaning things like conduct a Super Bowl interview. Yes, it's a huge risk, and yes, Biden can still win, but he's losing now. There's no plan to fix the problems other than hoping the polls are wrong or that voters look at the race differently when they have more time to focus on it. Well, yesterday, he put out a new thread saying Biden just hit a new all-time low in approval, 37.4% at 5:38 yesterday. Okay, that means that just over 1/3 of Americans approve of Joe Biden's job. Those are hardcore members of the Democratic Party base. Everyone else thinks he's terrible at his job. Dropping out, says Nate Silver, would be a big risk, but there's some threshold below which continuing to run is a bigger risk. Are we there yet? I don't know, but it's more than fair to ask. What's clearer, in my opinion, is that Democrats would have been better served if Biden had decided a year ago not to seek a second term, which would have allowed them to have some semblance of a primary process and given voters a say among the many popular Democrats across the country. Now, again, he is not wrong about all of this. There are people who are screaming at him today, suggesting that he is totally wrong, that Joe Biden's going to win running away. It is hard to see how Joe Biden wins running away when the man can't even walk at this point. He is not the only person saying this. Of course, James Carville, who was the sort of brain behind Bill Clinton's election victories in 1992 and 1996, he also said yesterday that Joe Biden should have stepped out of this race. He should not have run against Donald Trump.
You know, we have a choice to make in November, and it isn't a choice that I was crazy about. I actually was very public that I thought that President Biden should not run for re-election.
Now, underscoring all of Joe Biden's electoral troubles are a few factors. Factor number one, of course, is that the man is no longer with us. And every single day, there are more clips showing Joe Biden in the awkward position of being senile. I mean, he is falling apart. He is not even the Joe Biden of 4 years ago. And the Joe Biden of 4 years ago is not the Joe Biden of 8 years ago. And the Joe Biden of 8 years ago was no great shakes. So what you have here is effectively downstream from not being a very good politician. I mean, this guy ran for president multiple times before. It was only the halo effect of being Barack Obama's vice president that allowed him to run for president again in the first place in 2020. But now he is diminished. He is clearly diminished. He has problems remembering what country he's talking about. Yesterday, for example, Joe Biden mixed up Iraq and Ukraine. Honestly, he has mixed up in the last 2 weeks Taiwan and China, Taiwan and Ukraine, South Korea and Taiwan, Russia and Ukraine. You remember just a few months ago, he mixed up Mexico and Egypt. You know, I'm just wondering, how do you mix up these places? It's bizarre. Here he was yesterday.
I think there's a new rise and a sense of some within the country wanting to let that slip. The idea that we become semi-isolationists now, which some are talking about. I mean, the idea we had to wait all those months just to get the money for Iraq because we were waiting. I mean, it's not who we are. It's not who America is.
The money for Iraq. Yes, he is totally with us. And then, of course, this clip was going around yesterday. There's some sort of musical event at the White House, I guess. And everybody is bopping out to the music except for Joe Biden, who is standing there like a block of wood. He is a houseplant at this point, folks. And then, of course, he was making a speech yesterday, and he dropped this one right in the middle of the speech. If you can decipher this, we need a game here in which we determine whether you can decipher what Joe Biden is saying. It's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, except can you interpret the verbiage of this person? Here we go.
She knows so long as she was denied, our freedom can never be secured.
Well, I mean, it's true. Our freedom can never be secured unless you're... It's that sort of stuff that is making Americans a little bit discomfited. Combine that with the fact that obviously all of his issues are coming to a head. Jury deliberations are continuing right now with Hunter Biden. Will Hunter Biden actually be convicted of a crime? I don't know. This is happening in Wilmington, Delaware, which is Biden's hometown. None of this is reflecting well on Joe Biden. Beyond that, he is now bleeding support in a number of areas where he needs the support. Get to more on this in a moment. First, there's been some monumental news recently nobody is talking about. For the first time in American history, the interest we pay on the national debt surpassed every individual budget item except for Social Security. This means the U.S. now spends more on interest than on our national defense or even Medicare, which is disgraceful and is only getting worse as our government continues to spend like drunken sailors. That is why savvy investors, central banks, and concerned savers are turning to gold, because it's not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can too, with the help of Birch Gold. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text BEN to 989898. Claim your free, no-obligation info kit on gold. Birch Gold has earned my trust with their education-first approach. You can give them a call, ask them all your questions. Once those are answered, think about diversifying. They will earn your trust as well. They've earned the trust of thousands of other happy customers. Protect your savings today. Text BEN to 989898 to get started. Again, text BEN to 989898 and start diversifying today. Text BEN to 989898. So there's a headline yesterday suggesting that Joe Biden was not, in fact, losing Jewish support over the war in Gaza. I have some serious problems with this particular poll, which is from the American Jewish Committee, which is a left-leaning organization in the United States. But the American Jewish Committee found 61% of respondents plan to vote for Joe Biden come November. It said 23% will vote for Trump. Now, the way the media are playing that is that that's the exact same 38-point spread that Biden won in 2020. The difference is that Joe Biden won 68% of the Jewish vote, according to AP Votecast exit polling in the year 2020. So that's actually a 7-point decline from 2020. And by the way, it's more severe than that because when it comes to actual voter turnout, every Orthodox Jew is going to vote and many secular Jews simply are not. So those polls are wildly overestimating the amount of support that Joe Biden has in the Jewish community. Beyond that, obviously, he has been bleeding in a number of other areas as well. He is bleeding among young voters. An NPR investigation that came out just a couple of days ago found that when you look at young black voters are only supporting Joe Biden by a margin of 33 to 31 over Donald Trump. 21% say someone else and 11% say Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Among Latino young voters, Donald Trump is actually winning 32 to 28. He's actually leading more Donald Trump among Latino voters than he is among young white voters. So Joe Biden's coalition is bleeding, which leads to a question. What is his coalition at this point? What is his coalition? Now, you've all heard my theory, my grand unifying field theory of American politics, which is that in 2012, Barack Obama broke American politics. He should have lost that election. He won that election by cobbling together a coalition of the dispossessed plus a bunch of left-wing white single ladies. And that has been the Democratic coalition ever since. They stopped appealing to middle of America. They stopped pursuing moderate policies. They just decided to double down on the base over and over and over again and shout about Donald Trump. And so, led by these sort of twin chimeras of the coalition of losers vote, and when I say coalition of losers, I'm not talking about racial groups in general. I'm talking about their entire strategy is to tell certain subsections of each particular group they're victims of American society. This is part and parcel of the Democratic campaign. So that chimera, which the most Americans want to hear, that they are in fact victims of American society, combined with the chimera that if you just shout Trump over and over and over, you are likely to win. That strategy, by the way, has only worked once. Right? It's been tried twice. It only worked once. That once came in 2020, which was the weird, outstanding election of our lifetime. Joe Biden keeps doubling down on the Barack Obama strategy. He is going to appeal, he believes, to left-wing white single ladies as well as minority voters. That is going to be his coalition. And it is leading him down an electoral primrose path here that is quite dangerous. It also happens to be that by feeding the grievances of particular groups in the United States who don't actually have serious grievances in the United States, you end up with a major problem. It turns out that politics is not merely a reflection of the American people. It also drives people. When you lie to the American public, when you tell members of the American public they are victimized by American society, what you end up with is a more perverse version of American society. It turns out that if you want a healthy society, that healthy society is predicated upon certain norms that have to be shared in common by literally everyone. These are not norms that should be discarded or turned into dichotomous political issues. But that is exactly what, in the pursuit of this new electoral coalition, Barack Obama did in 2012, and it's what Joe Biden is doing right now. And it's breaking wide open a bunch of weird notions in American life. So start with this one. There was a poll recently from Pew that looked at differences between Democrats and Republicans, between Biden supporters and Trump supporters on sort of key issues of the day. And so it looked at their feelings about abortion, looked at their feelings about foreign policy. But there was one question in particular that really goes to the heart of the future of the country. And it's really a problem. It's something that the Democrats have been promoting full scale as a worldview, and it's making the country significantly worse. So according to this Pew Research polling, the question was percentage of registered voters who say society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. Now, the truth is that number should be 100%. It should be 100%. Every single person, I don't care if you are straight, if you are gay, if you are married, if you are unmarried, the health of society rests on healthy families. The suggestion of anything otherwise is simply ridiculous. In fact, the only groups, historically speaking, who have rejected the idea that a healthy society rests on healthy families tend to be cult ideologies like Marxism and Nazism, ones that suggest that the state ought to be your family, or super libertarian ideas that suggest that the family is some sort of repressive factor in life and should be exploded entirely. But for virtually everyone else who lives in the real world, the family is, of course, the healthy family is the basis of any society. So should people make marriage and having children a priority? Of course. Doesn't mean that career shouldn't be a priority, but clearly the priority for any civilization should be creating healthy homes and then having kids. This should not be even remotely controversial. However, it turns out it really, really is. So here is the voting gap on that particular issue. 59% of Trump supporters say society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. So number one, that's extremely low. The right wing of the country, only 60% believe that having children and making marriage a priority, that is a good for society, not even for you individually, for society. So that speaks to an anti-natalist culture in the United States. It speaks to the idea that expressive individualism, which is a phrase that was coined by Robert Bella and then has been taken up by Alistair McIntyre to describe the viewpoint we have about ourselves, which is that basically the only obligations we owe are obligations to ourselves as opposed to family and then society at large, that has taken real hold, that our feelings are us, and those are the people who matter the most. That's taken hold among everyone, including Trump supporters, 59% of whom say society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. But look at this gap. 19% of Biden supporters say that should be a priority. Less than 1 in 5 supporters of Joe Biden believe it should be a priority to make marriage and having children like top priority for society. That's insane. That is the death of a civilization kind of ideology. And of course, it's become incredibly pervasive. Among all voters, only about 39% say that society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority, which speaks again to the decline of the society. And that has been pushed, as we can see, in heavily partisan fashion. That is right there, a 40-point gap between Trump supporters and Biden supporters on the very basic question as to whether marriage and family ought to be top priority in a society. When you look at those gaps among, for example, college grads, you can see it even more broadly. Trump supporting college grads, 66% believe that society is better off if you get married and have kids. Only 17% of Biden supporting college grads believe that society is better off if people make marriage and having kids a priority. That is an amazing number. And again, a minority, literally a minority of every ethnic group in the United States now believes this. That is a serious problem. It's been promoted by one side of the political aisle above all. Obviously, the Republican Party, conservatives, have been promoting the idea that family is crucial for my entire lifetime and well before. But the left in the United States has successfully made the case that marriage and family are not a priority, which, by the way, is one of the reasons you are seeing this massive gender gap that is opening up between Trump supporters and Biden supporters. Biden supporters are heavily female. Trump supporters are increasingly male. That's what happens when you explode the institution of marriage. The institution of marriage used to put people generally on the same political page. This is why married women tend to vote like men. Not because married women have become enthralled to men, but because when the common cause of a woman and a man is the family, it turns out that that family is going to need things like supportive institutions like church, that family is going to want to be left alone by the government more often. When you explode marriage, what you end up with is men who are unmoored from women, and women who believe that the highest form of self-exploration and self-fulfillment must exist apart from men and having kids. And again, this boggles the minds, I think, of most normies. Most people, and when I say normies, I don't mean that you're abnormal if you believe the opposite. I think that most people historically, the vast majority of societies historically, have always believed that marriage and having kids was the priority. And separating yourself off from the main purpose of living is a bizarro world take. But it has become the predominant take in the West, which is why the West is collapsing and it's being exacerbated by political divides in the West. Again, it's sort of fascinating. The health of any society is predicated on the intermediate institutions of that society. This is a point made by the sociologist Robert Nisbet. Not unique to me, obviously. The way that most people function in society is with relation to their community, with relation to their church, with relation to their family. These are called the intermediate institutions of society. There are two other levels of society, the state and the individual. And what we have seen as the family breaks down, what we have seen as intermediate institutions like church and social groups, as those break down, what we have seen is a divide in America between the radical individualists and the radical statists. And sometimes they weirdly end up on sort of a horseshoe theory, same side of the issues. Whatever it is not good for American society. You know what's incredibly stupid? Believing that somehow countries don't have an obligation to rescue their hostages. That's really, really dumb. You know what else is stupid? Not getting life insurance. Getting life insurance will give you peace of mind, knowing if something were to happen to you, your family could cover their expenses while getting back on their feet. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies starting at just $292 per year for $1 million in coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid those unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius has licensed award-winning agents and technology that make it easy to compare life insurance quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find that lowest price. Their team of licensed experts is on hand to help you through the process. Even if you already have a life insurance policy through work, it might not offer enough protection for your family's needs. It might not follow you if you leave your job. Policy Genius works for you, not the insurance companies, which means they don't have the incentive to recommend one insurer over another. So save time, save money, provide your family with a financial safety net using Policy Genius. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro. Get your free life insurance quotes. See how much you could save today. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. Again, policygenius.com/Shapiro. So you have the Biden coalition, which is largely composed of young single women who agree with that poll that getting married and having kids is really not a priority and certainly is not the main priority. Combine that with Joe Biden's belief that he needs heavy minority turnout. And so that means you have to start looking at the opinions of minorities in the United States, particularly Black Americans. Joe Biden is focused in laser-like on the idea that he's going to win, like Barack Obama did in 2012, a heavy share of the Black vote. So why exactly, how's he going to pander to those voters? Now, we've seen Joe Biden trying to pander to those voters before, suggesting that all Black people are victims in society. And many people, many Americans, Black, white, everybody has been like, well, that's weird. Why is he doing that? Especially given the fact that Joe Biden is going to places like Morehouse College and saying at graduations that Black people are victims. Well, you can see why Joe Biden is doing that. There's new polling data out from Pew of Black Americans. And here is the share of Black adults who believe in particular ideas. First, Black public officials are singled out to be discredited. 76% of Black adults believe that Black public officials are singled out to be discredited, which is an amazing statement considering that people like Kamala Harris exist. And Kamala Harris is literally only vice president because she's a Black woman. That is not me saying that. That is Joe Biden saying that. 76% believe that police do little to stop guns and drugs in Black communities, which comes into conflict with the other belief by Black Americans, which is that they are routinely victimized by the justice system. So you want it both ways, it turns out in this poll, that police do little to stop guns and drugs in Black communities, but 74% believe that Black people are disproportionately incarcerated so prisons can make money. Those two things are in direct conflict. If you want the police to do more about drugs and guns, it turns out that many people are going to go to jail for, the drugs and the guns. But this means that 3/4 of Black Americans believe that the police are not doing anything to stop guns and drugs in Black communities, and also that Black people are disproportionately incarcerated so prisons can make money. 67% of Black Americans apparently believe that big businesses market luxury items to Black people to keep them in debt, not because those businesses want to make money, but because they want to keep Black people in debt, which again makes zero sense. If you're a capitalist, you actually do not want your customers to go bankrupt. It turns out they can't pay you when they go bankrupt. 55% of Black Americans say that medical researchers experiment on Black people without their knowledge or consent, as in today. Not the Tuskegee experiments, the evil Tuskegee experiments of like the 1940s and 50s. Like today. 55% believe the government encourages single motherhood among Black women to eliminate the need for Black men. Now, again, I think that the welfare state has done an extraordinary disservice to Black Americans and has broken up the Black family. But the notion that that's been the explicit purpose is to make Black men unnecessary in the household is a stretch. 51% believe that the government promotes birth control and or abortion to keep the Black population small. Okay, so these are very heavily conspiratorial beliefs. Behind the scenes, according to Axios, Kiana Cox, a senior researcher on Pew Research Center's race and ethnicity team, tells Axios the study was developed by asking Black participants if they'd ever heard of particular racial beliefs, later dubbed conspiracy theories in research findings. If they had, researchers asked if the participants thought the beliefs were true. Cox said, "We asked this in stages. We didn't phrase it as conspiracy theories in the survey because the term can be a little charged. For Black people, these types of narratives are also grounded in history." Now, again, I love that sort of language. Grounded in history. I'm sorry. It's grounded in history that medical researchers currently experiment on Black people without their knowledge or consent. I mean, yes, black people, that's happened to Black people 70 years ago, 80 years ago. It's also the year 2024. This month marks 2 years since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Did you know the number of abortions have actually increased since then? New estimates show that more than 1 million babies were killed by abortion in 2023, the highest number of abortions since 2012. The overturning of Roe versus Wade has unfortunately made the abortion pill more readily available. It now accounts for up to 64% of all abortions, but Preborn continues to stand strong on behalf of life. Preborn is the largest pro-life organization in the country. They provide free ultrasounds to moms with unplanned pregnancies to introduce them to the precious life growing inside them. When a mom meets her baby on ultrasound and hears their heartbeat, she is twice as likely to choose life. How can you help? Every day, Preborn rescues 200 lives. One ultrasound costs only $28 and could be the difference between life and death. Please join the fight by sponsoring 1, 2, or more ultrasounds. If you have the means, you can sponsor Preborn's entire network for a day for $5,000. Whatever gift you give will go towards saving lives. All gifts are tax deductible. Go to preborn.com/Ben to donate today. That's preborn.com/Ben, or dial pound 250, say keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby to get started today. So Joe Biden has to cater. He has to cater. And the way that you cater, if you are Joe Biden, in the end, is that what you have to do is you have to suggest that members of your voting bloc are in fact victims. This ties into the broader left-wing intersectional theory. What is their grand unifying theory of politics? It isn't quite as cynical as my grand unifying theory of politics, which is that Barack Obama decided he was going to appeal to certain specific groups, cobble them together, and win a victory in 2012. And ever since, Democrats have been trying to bind that coalition together. If you're a Democrat, the question is, what is the glue that holds that coalition together? Because, of course, it's a very awkward coalition. If your coalition is queers for Palestine or single ladies for less police, it's a very, very weird coalition. How do you keep that coalition together? And the answer, of course, is a victim mentality being inculcated by the Democratic Party and promoted. The idea is that there is, in fact, an intersectional coalition of people, all of whom are victims of white Christian males predominantly. And if they rise up together, they can smite the white Christian males. Now, it's kind of awkward to have at the top of your ticket an 81-year-old self-stated white Christian male, but you do what you can. And so this is one of the reasons why the Democratic Party has been moving in such radical directions on, for example, the Gaza war. So when you look at Gaza, it turns out that young Americans don't actually care very much about Gaza. That same poll that showed low levels of support for Joe Biden from young Americans, that same poll shows that very few young Americans actually see the war in Gaza as a serious issue for them. Only 5% of Latino voters label the war in Gaza a top issue. That's not a very high number. Only 4% overall of young people say that Gaza is the top issue. For Black voters, it's like 3%. But the reason that the Biden administration has been focused in laser-like on the Gaza war is because I think they rightly perceive that the Gaza war has become the tip of the spear of this so-called omni cause. And I didn't coin the term omni cause, but it's a very good term. I can't remember who coined it. Forgive me for not mentioning your name if you did. The omni cause idea is that everybody has to believe in the same general rubric of ideas. Again, this intersectional idea, which unifies you against the overarching structure. And Gaza is like the apex, the tip of the spear on this. Because if you can believe the absurdity that is in fact a victim of white Christian males or white Jews or white people generally, or Western civilization generally, and they are part of your cause, despite the fact they're an evil terrorist group, then you are willing to commit to pretty much anything. It's why Black Lives Matter, before October 7th, was talking about the so-called Palestinian cause. It's why after October 7th, Black Lives Matter put out an actual graphic depicting a silhouette of a person in a paraglider attacking the Nova Festival on October 7th. Because again, if the idea is victimhood and victim ideology, then is there a better example of that on planet Earth than the claims made by and their supporters? A claim that you start a war, you lose a war, and therefore you have been victimized by a big, bad Zionist society. It's like the perfect example of whining until you win, of gaining world support by being evil and then whining about it, or shooting yourself in the foot and then complaining about the wound. So this is why the Biden administration has been coming around to this. It also explains why there is so much angst among the Democratic Party elite over the war in Gaza, when in reality, if they just treated it like they treat any other war, which is it's a war very far away that involves a Democratic ally of the United States and a terrorist group, so give them the support they need to win the war and then leave it alone, this thing would have been over in February already. But the Democratic Party couldn't allow it to be over in February. Instead, they have to keep pressing down that gas pedal on the intersectional coalition. This is why, for example, you see James Clyburn, who is one of the people who made Joe Biden president. If you go all the way back to 2020, you'll recall that Bernie Sanders won a bunch of primaries very, very early on in the process, and it looked like he might be on a glide path to the nomination. And James Clyburn in South Carolina, who has outsized weight, made the appeal to the black community that Joe Biden needed to be the nominee. Well, now James Clyburn is saying that he's not going to attend a speech by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which is currently scheduled for July 24th in Congress. Now, why? The answer is because the intersectional coalition has decided that Hamas is a member of the international intersectional coalition. Here is James Clyburn doing the pandering routine.
Leon Russell, the chairman of the board of the NAACP, is a longtime friend of mine. We're celebrating 50 years this year knowing each other. I'm going to be communicating this week with Derek Johnson, the president and CEO of the NAACP. And I'm going to look for others to join me in developing, putting together an alternative to what the Netanyahu would be saying and doing when it comes to that joint session. I do not plan to attend it because I'm going to treat him the same way he treated Barack Obama. But I am going to participate with a group of others in an alternative session to his joint session and see whether or not we can get some attention to what makes sense.
An alternative session. Pray tell, what would the alternative session be? Also, by the way, the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu is the one who treated Barack Obama badly is so patently insane. I mean, you have to be totally ignorant of American history in order to believe this. Barack Obama literally made Benjamin Netanyahu, when he visited the White House, exit through a side entrance of the White House, like where they take out the trash at the White House. It was Barack Obama who fostered the most anti-Israel administration this side of Joe Biden. But again, this is all part of the broader left-wing coalition. And this is why the Biden administration can't simply have their Sister Souljah moment. They wouldn't, number one, they certainly would not have a Sister Souljah moment like in reality today. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, election year typically means chaos for us, for our wallets. Since 1952, the stock market has underperformed during election years, averaging a 7% gain. The S&P is up so far this year, but who knows what's going to happen. How do we prepare for market volatility? Text Shapiro to 200-300 and get connected with the Masterworks advisors and find out. You'll be able to speak to their expert team about potentially investing in the blue chip contemporary art asset class, which has had almost no correlation with the stock market for the last 28 years and whose price appreciation has actually outpaced the S&P during that same time, according to internal data of public auction sales. You don't need any kind of art expertise or millions of bucks to invest. Masterworks advisors have real people standing by right now. Just text Shapiro to 200-300. That is Shapiro to 200-300. This advertisement relates to the provision of advisory services by Masterworks Advisors, LLC, and is not intended to offer or solicit investment in any securities. I'm not an investor with Masterworks Advisors. Masterworks Advisors is affiliated with Masterworks. Texting privacy policy and terms and conditions posted at textplan.us. Texting enrolls for recurring automated text marketing messages. Message and data rates may apply. Reply stop to opt out. For those who remember the Sister Souljah moment, which has become sort of a byword in American politics, this happened when Bill Clinton was running for office in 1992, and he rejected the viewpoint of a hip-hop MC named Sister Souljah. Okay, just to review what this means. She was asked a question about people who were perpetrating violence during the 1992 LA riots. And here's what she said. She said, yeah, it was wise. I mean, if black people kill black people every day, why not have a week and kill white people? White people, this government and that mayor were well aware of the fact that black people were dying every day in LA under gang violence. So if you're a gang member and you would normally be killing somebody, why not kill a white person? Do you think somebody kills that white people? Somebody thinks that white people are better, are above and beyond dying when they would kill their own kind? Right, that is what she said in 1992. And then Bill Clinton did a speech in which he rejected those words. Do you think Joe Biden would reject those words today? Or would he just say, that's coming from a place of truly justified anger, that she may have gone too far, but we understand why she's complaining. This is how the Democratic Party has moved. The party of Bill Clinton in 1992 tried to appeal to middle-of-the-road voters. The party of 2024 takes the radicals, tut-tuts them, pats them on the head, tries to hug them, and then at the same time tries to keep them at just enough arm's length to not alienate every moderate voter, which is why, for example, pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas hecklers keep showing up and yelling at Joe Biden, and Joe Biden and the Democrats literally don't know what to do with them. Here's a pro-Hamas heckler yelling Genocide Joe at Joe Biden.
You're gonna do Genocide Joe! Tens of thousands of Palestinians!
So you can see this guy yelling at Joe Biden, and then they go back to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden has no response to that. This happened to Kamala Harris the other day. She was also yelled at by a protester, and she said, we want to hear your voice. We want to hear your voice. The Democratic Party cannot alienate members of the intersectional coalition by pointing out that not everyone who claims victimhood status is, in fact, a victim. And this has bled up into the cultural sphere. Apparently, there's a person named Chappell Roan. I've never heard of her. Apparently, she is some sort of singer. And she was going to sing, I guess, for Pride Month, because it is the holiest month of the year in the United States. Roan, in full green Statue of Liberty body paint, started a set on Sunday by addressing her audience and suggesting that she would not be going to the White House.
As a response to the White House, who asked me to perform for Pride. We want liberty, justice, and freedom for all. When you do that, that's when I'll come.
Okay, and made an overt appeal with regard to Gaza. And this is why, again, the Biden administration having such trouble with moderates, having such trouble, and they're going to continue to cobble together the coalition of people who believe that they are victims and who are not building institutions, who are not building families, who are not building the intermediate institutions of society that make society function. That is the message of the Biden administration, is that you're a bunch of victim groups. American society has victimized you, vote for Joe Biden. Does that sound like a winning message to you? It doesn't sound very much like a winning message to me, which is why they're going to rely on their second message. As I say, they've had a couple of messages since 2012. Message number one is that there are a bunch of victimized groups in American society, and that bunch of victimized groups must vote for Democrats in order to overcome. And the second message is Donald Trump. We'll get to that one in just one moment. First, with all the focus on our broken justice system and judges abusing their roles, there's one judge who will never abuse his role. Of course, I'm talking about Judge Matt Walsh. The final episode of Judged by Matt Walsh, season 1, is now streaming exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. I'll be honest with you, when I first heard that they were making Matt Walsh into some sort of judge and that those judgments that he made would be legally binding, my first thought was that is a horrible idea, because who exactly would give Matt Walsh that kind of decision-making authority? But then it turns out that there are a number of people who would like to be judged by Matt Walsh. So Matt had promised us the pettiest of courts. He definitely delivered. Check out a sneak peek of the final episode of Judged by Matt Walsh.
Coming up on Judged. You are over the age of 11. You're big into Halloween. What does that mean exactly?
I have a very large display, animatronics. Kids enjoy it. My kids enjoy it.
So you're trying to lure the kids in the neighborhood to your house?
For candy.
For candy?
Does
that make it better?
That does not make it better at all.
I went to console one of the dogs, and I said, "Who's a big boy?" And I rubbed his belly, and I assumed...
The question was not directed at you. Or was it? Were you fat-shaming the bailiff?
You can watch as Judge Walsh slams that gavel one last time this season. It's the finale of Judged by Matt Walsh, streaming now exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. Well, meanwhile, if message A of the Democratic Party since 2012 has been, here's our coalition of the dispossessed, and message B has been, Donald Trump is the worst person to ever walk the earth, a message that did not work in 2016 and seemed to kind of work in 2020. Then going forward into 2024, when Joe Biden is riding high at 37% in the approval ratings, where do you think they are going to go? Well, it's pretty obvious right now what the setup is for the Joe Biden-Donald Trump debate. That Biden-Trump debate is slated to take place in just a couple of weeks here. June 27th is when that's going to happen. Apparently, Joe Biden is now heading up to Camp David to prepare for the June 27th debate. I assume he's just going to sleep a lot. I mean, because what else do you do to prepare for that debate? Meanwhile, Trump senior advisor Jason Miller said President Trump takes on numerous tough interviews every single week and delivers lengthy rally speeches while demonstrating elite stamina. So, again, the idea here is going to be from Team Trump that Joe Biden is going to simply fall down on the stage. Now, again, I think that that's a bad setup for Donald Trump. I think that if he sets the bar so low as Joe Biden remains alive, then Joe Biden will probably surpass that bar. They'll take him in the back room. They'll hook him up to some 14-year-old kid. They'll pump the blood into old Joe. They'll shove him on out there with some amphetamines in his system, and he'll last for a couple of hours. However, the real message that Joe Biden is going to seek to promote is that Donald Trump is a threat to the Republic. It's a very difficult argument to make, given the fact that Joe Biden is, in fact, a threat to the Republic. Not just because he's prosecuting his political opponents, but because he's doing a terrible job on every single front. Every appeal that Joe Biden makes on policy is doomed to fail. So, for example, yesterday, senior Biden spokesperson Adrian Elrod was ripping on Trump on foreign policy. This is a dog that will not hunt. Joe Biden is the worst foreign policy president probably ever. I'm not kidding. He is probably the worst foreign policy president in the history of the United States. But here they are trying to promote this idea.
This is the freedom that people have, going back to the message of freedom. They have the right to protest. They have the right to speak their mind. He's not going to take anything for granted. And I think it's also important to really keep in mind, Jonathan, during these challenging times on the foreign policy front, on the global front. Can you imagine having Donald Trump back in the White House trying to manage all of this? I mean, President Biden's a seasoned foreign policy pro. He served, of course, as the chair on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a long time. He has these relationships with world leaders that go very, very deep.
Yeah, that is not going to work because he's terrible on foreign policy. So what are they going to rely on? In the end, they're going to rely on January 6th, and Trump is a nut. So yesterday, in a pretty astonishing interview, Abby Phillip had on, she of course, is a very objective journalismer. I mean, just journalisming happening all over the place. The journalism is getting everywhere. Hot, sticky journalism happening here between Abby Phillip and George Stephanopoulos. So George Stephanopoulos, another journalismer par excellence, a person who was literally a White House press secretary for the Clintons, who is now an objective news reporter. So Abby Phillip has on George Stephanopoulos, and they talk about what should be the subject of the debate. And they both agree. They both agree. The only subject of the entire debate should be January 6th and Donald Trump being an election denier. Here we go.
We've got a presidential debate coming up right here on CNN later this month. As a journalist, as an American, what do you think is the most important question that needs to be answered from both candidates?
Who won the last election?
Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah. And
who won the last election? Let's discuss and debate.
Okay, and Stephanopoulos says he would ask zero other questions. He said that's literally the only question that he would ask. And if that question doesn't get asked, he would just keep coming back to the question. I mean, at this point, why doesn't he just go debate Donald Trump himself? Now, Donald Trump is going to have an answer for this because the reality is Democrats are going to come after him on this. Now, I think there are a few answers he could give. He could say, listen, I think that there was a lot that was wrong with that election cycle. I made that very clear. I did leave office when I was constitutionally obligated to do so. But I will tell you what is also crystal clear to me. I do not prosecute my political opposition. Joe Biden does. If we're talking about dangers to democracy, if we're talking about election denial, why not look to the Democratic side of the aisle where Hillary Clinton has been spending years denying that she lost the 2016 election? Why not look to the Democratic side of the aisle where they literally militarized half of the deep state in order to deny that Donald Trump won the 2016 election? And there are a bunch of ways in which Trump can reframe. But I think that the big temptation for Trump is to be stuck in that tar pit because he likes talking about 2020. The American public, however, really does not like talking about 2020. That's what Democrats want him to do. It's the biggest trap of the entire debate. And the media are going to obviously be on Joe Biden's side of that debate. Meanwhile, Karine Jean-Pierre is pushing the idea that anybody who opposes the Biden administration is distributing misinformation. And there's another, I think, rich vein for Trump to mine, which is that the 2020 election probably would have gone differently if the entire media, including the moderators, I'm sure, at the debate, had not covered up the Hunter Biden story. But here's Karine Jean-Pierre going off on misinformation.
We have seen the consequences of what happens when communities don't know where to turn for trusted information. There's calamity and chaos and even catastrophe. And from the fires on Maui to hurricanes across the East and Gulf Coast, we have both seen what happens when dangerous misinformation drives a wedge between communicators and the American people.
It's amazing. So this is going to be their message. It's going to be Trump all the way down. And it's going to be Democrats promoting alarmist nonsense about how Trump is going to jail them. I love this. Here is Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez worrying that Donald Trump is going to throw her in jail. No, you're the best thing that ever happened to Donald Trump, AOC, because you just say stupid crap all the time and make Republicans more likely to vote. Also, if we're talking about people who try to jail their political opponents, you might want to look to the guy who's the president of your party. But here is AOC worried that she's going to be thrown into jail. Do you really believe that AOC thinks she's going to be thrown into jail? Seriously?
What happens to you if Donald Trump wins? What do you do? What's your first move?
I mean, it sounds nuts, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy threw me in jail.
Really?
He's out of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he did his whole first campaign around lock her up. Like, this is his motto.
Oh, he didn't say that, He said he didn't say that. Teasing.
Yeah, right?
That, yeah.
I take him at his word.
You take him at his word that he's going to lock people up? Weird, because he didn't. I noticed. There were chances of lock her up, and then he was actually the president. Did he lock Hillary Clinton up? I missed that part where she ended up going to jail, although she certainly should have. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is doing the same routine. I will just remind everybody in the audience, if Joe Biden is elected, Kamala Harris will be president. It is that simple. There is no way he finishes a second term. So if you want this smarm factory over here to be president of the United States, I highly recommend voting for Joe Biden. Here is Kamala Harris ripping into Trump for referring to violence if he is sent to jail. Again, the only kind of violence the Democrats are against is violence perpetrated by any of their political opponents that is all in their head, or virtually all in their head. Here is Kamala Harris.
Since the verdict, he attacks the judge and the witnesses. He suggests the case could be a, quote, breaking point for his supporters, hinting at violence. He spreads lies that our administration is controlling the case when everyone knows it was a state prosecution. And he says that he will use a second term for revenge. So what does all of this tell us? Well, simply put, Donald Trump really thinks he's above the law. He really does. And this should be disqualifying for anyone who wants to be president of the United States.
Unbelievable stuff there from Kamala Harris. So again, that is going to be the Democrats' twin appeal in the face of Joe Biden's wild unpopularity. It's going to be that you are a member of a victimized subgroup in the United States, and two, that Donald Trump is a danger to the republic. The big problem is I'm not sure people are buying it. I really don't think the American people are going to buy this, because it turns out that on policy, Joe Biden has been a terrible threat to the republic. Even members of the media are beginning to notice it. Here was an ABC reporter questioning the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, yesterday, asking about Joe Biden's immigration policy and saying pretty openly, you keep saying it's successful. What's the success exactly?
We will succeed. That was 3 years ago. Since then, 6.5 million migrants have been apprehended along the southern border. It would be very hard to call that a success.
Martha, remember something, that migration is a dynamic phenomenon. It is something that we alone are, it's not just us who is experiencing it, throughout the region and throughout the world.
Sure. It's all because of everybody else. Okay. Again, the underneath all of this, by the way, are all sorts of other concerns. The economy continues to blink red right now. Joe Biden's economy is still suffering from an overage of inflation. According to the Wall Street Journal, inflation is still higher than the 2% the Federal Reserve is aiming for. Now the media are trying to turn that into everything is fine. They say maybe that's okay. That is, if we could just put aside the fact that we hate inflation so much. So it's us. It is us. We've been misinterpreting the high prices. If only we understood Joe Biden, we would understand that high prices are good now. According to the Wall Street Journal, Fed policymakers are poised on Wednesday to leave their benchmark federal funds rate steady at the highest level in more than 2 decades, and inflation is the biggest reason. Their preferred measure of consumer prices from the Commerce Department was up 2.7% from a year earlier in April. That marks an improvement from April 2023 when it was up 4.4%, but still doesn't show the kind of progress investors were hoping for at the beginning of the year. But apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, a higher inflation rate might be good. It would allow the Fed to set interest rates higher. Then when the economy ran into trouble, the central bank would have more scope to cut rates before hitting zero. So probably we should be happy with the high inflation rates. Good luck trying to sell this one, but they are trying to sell it. Two economists, Jim Parrott and Mark Zandi. Zandi, of course, is chief economist of Moody's Analytics. They are now saying that Joe Biden's Federal Reserve should declare victory on inflation and cut the interest rates despite the fact that inflation is still running 50% too high. Again, trying to pull out all the stops on Joe Biden is going to lead to some pretty dire consequences between now and the election. I'm honestly, in many ways, worried about what Joe Biden is going to do between now and the election more than I am worried about the election itself. I think Donald Trump is in fairly solid position to win if he doesn't step all over himself. But I think the damage that Joe Biden can do in a bizarre attempt to maintain his office between now and the election, that's going to be some pretty dangerous stuff. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, are you still struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? Well, this year, the IRS is coming after you. They're escalating their collections by adding 20,000 new agents and sending millions of demand letters. Now that tax season is over, collection season, unfortunately, has begun. Handling this alone can be a huge mistake and can cost you thousands of bucks. In these challenging times, your best offense is Tax Network USA. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring that aggressive collection activities like garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted, providing you the peace of mind and financial security you need. If you haven't filed in a while, if you need amended returns, if you're missing records, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all your filings, eliminating the risk of IRS enforcement. Tax Network USA will evaluate your financials and create a settlement strategy to reduce or eliminate your tax debt, putting it behind you for good. Don't wait any longer. Call our friends at Tax Network USA today. For a complimentary consultation, call 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. I can tell you that in Europe, it's not selling. So people on the left internationally are freaking out because the EU decided to shift. The European parliamentary elections shifted dramatically in favor of the right, which is called the far right in Europe. The far right is basically anybody who's to the right of Emmanuel Macron. According to the Washington Post, in European Parliament elections Sunday night, the far right surged in nations including Germany and Austria, but nowhere with more impact than in France. The National Rally there clobbered the ruling centrist coalition so badly that President Emmanuel Macron dissolved the French National Assembly and called snap legislative elections. His bet, voters might be angry at him, but they're not prepared to allow the pick of Marine Le Pen, the fiery doyen of French nationalist, Eurosceptic anti-immigration politics, to head a new French government. It's a bet that carries a high risk. Already that uncertainty was reflected on the French stock market on Monday. The mayor of Paris called the dissolution of parliament ahead of the Olympics extremely disturbing. The person who is running to replace Emmanuel Macron is a 28-year-old young man named Jordan Bardella, who's the protege of Marine Le Pen. On Sunday, Bardella led Le Pen's far-right opposition party to its biggest victory ever in European elections, according to the Wall Street Journal. Public anxiety over the possibility of far-right forces rising to power, as they once had in Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Vichy France, has been a defining feature of French elections for decades, according to the Wall Street Journal. Look how they're trying to look at that. I mean, just comparing Jordan Bardella to the Nazis. Amazing, amazing stuff. It should be noted at this point that the National Rally Party is the most pro-Israel party in French politics. It should be noted that Emmanuel Macron is far, far more pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas than Jordan Bardella is in France at this point. The stigma around National Rally, the Wall Street Journal admits, has begun to fade with every passing election. National Rally maintains its strident anti-immigrant stance, but its ideas are no longer fringe. Bardella, meanwhile, is a nimble politician. He made a point of attending a march against anti-Semitism held after the October 7th attacks on Israel. Days before, a television interviewer asked him whether Jean-Marie Le Pen was an anti-Semite. I was born in 1995, Bardella said. You're talking to me about an era I didn't experience. He said, I wouldn't make the comments he made about the detail because for me, the horrors of the Holocaust aren't the detail of history. So he doesn't want to separate off from the founders of his party, but he's making very clear that he is not standing with, for example, Jean-Marie Le Pen's views about Jews. And it is impressive to see the Europeans begin to reject that which ought to be rejected in the United States as well. Meanwhile, again, the Biden administration totally discombobulated on foreign policy. Antony Blinken has been deployed to the Middle East once again to slow Israel's role in Rafah. That's basically what happens. The United States has decided that it is in the interest of the United States for Hamas to remain some sort of governing entity in the Gaza Strip. There's no other way to explain what is being done right now. So Anthony Blinken has now been deployed in order to go yell at Bibi Netanyahu. It's not going to have the same effect because there was a war cabinet in Israel until 5 minutes ago that was staffed by people who are much more friendly to Anthony Blinken's point of view, including, of course, Gadi Eisenkot and Benny Gantz. They both stepped out of the war government just over the weekend. So that means that whatever Blinken says is now being heard by Benjamin Netanyahu, now accompanied by the rest of his normally elected government, which is a far more right-wing government than the war cabinet was. So what is the United States doing? The United States is now talking about the possibility of signing a separate deal with Hamas. I don't even know how that would work in order to free the 5 American hostages. What does that even look like? What can the United States offer Hamas? Hamas doesn't care about humanitarian aid. They don't want the humanitarian aid. They want people starving. They're shooting people who bring in humanitarian aid. What exactly should the United States taxpayer be contributing to Hamas here? So what exactly? It's ridiculous. What it really is an attempt to put extraneous pressure on Israel to sign some sort of permanent ceasefire, which is not going to happen. That same sort of effort was pursued yesterday at the UN Security Council. According to the Times of Israel, the UN Security Council adopted a U.S.-led resolution on Monday urging Hamas to accept Israel's latest hostage for ceasefire proposal. Now, of course, as we've been discussing for 2 weeks here, the proposal that has been suggested is Israel by Biden is not Israel's. The Israeli government has already said, we didn't make that proposal. The way you're articulating it is not what we said. Biden is trying to push it anyway via the United Nations, which is why Hamas then put out a statement supporting the UN Security Council resolution without accepting any deal, which is, again, demonstrating exactly the game here, which is any deal that would happen to free the hostages has to allow Israel the continuation of the war to extirpate Hamas. Hamas will not sign any deal that frees the hostages that actually makes them go away. So they're stuck. That's the impasse. And you can gloss over that with some diplomatic happy talk, but it ain't going to work. So Hamas is embracing the UN Security Council resolution, apparently in the belief that the Biden administration will be able to cram down a permanent ceasefire on Netanyahu's government. Not going to happen. And the United States is pretending that Hamas is against the ceasefire because, again, they are against any sort of ceasefire that removes them from power. Russia abstained. They said members were being told Israel accepted the proposal, but Netanyahu has repeatedly insisted the war will continue until Hamas has been defeated. So Russia abstained because Russia actually is seeing through the veil here. Russia's saying, well, I mean, there's no agreement. So what exactly is the UN Security Council proposing? So again, this is just absolutely discombobulated policy from the Biden administration, but that is par for the course around the White House. Alrighty, coming up, we will get into a good comment in pop culture and a bad comment in pop culture in just 1 second. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.